You're listening to episode 45 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Dr. Sam Himelstein joins us to talk about his new book, Mindfulness-Based Substance Abuse Treatment for Adolescents, a 12-session curriculum. Working with at-risk youth has some unique requirements from mindfulness teachers and clinicians. It involves not only having your own deep practice and being authentic with those you serve, but also having an understanding of what structure may be most effective at helping adolescents deal with their substance abuse. Sam Himelstein, PhD, is a licensed psychologist in the state of California and a behavioral health clinician at the Alameda County Juvenile Justice Center. Sam has dedicated his career to working with high-risk and incarcerated adolescents. Our guest today is Dr. Sam Himelstein. Sam, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ted. I'm real happy to be here.
So glad to have you speaking with us again and about your new book. But before we go into that, let's talk about some things that have been happening in your life, some changes that have occurred since we last spoke. You were with MBA Project, for example, and that's changed. Tell us more about what's been going on.
Right. So I was with the Mind Body Awareness Project for close to about 7 years, and I held many positions there. And I think the last position I held was program director. And, I got an opportunity at the local juvenile hall, actually the same juvenile hall that the MBA project goes into to teach meditation classes. I got an opportunity to be a therapist, to be a psychologist, and I've always wanted to do that from the inside out. When you're a community-based organization that's contracted to come in, there's always limitations and barriers in terms of how much access you get to the youth. But when you're working for the county or for the institution from the inside, some of those barriers, there's still barriers, but some of them come down. And I've always wanted to do that. So basically, I took a job and I work in the maximum security unit every day, and I get to see kids as much as I want. I usually see kids about once a week for therapy, and I do my mindfulness group once a week as well with the young folks there. But there's a number of kids who need more support, and I see them 2 or 3 times a week on top of a mindfulness group. And that's the main reason that I wanted to make that shift in my career, was because I wanted to just have more access and be able to work with youth more, because that's my number one absolute passion. So, it was bittersweet. I was at NBA for a long time, and it was hard to go because I had a lot of emotion there, and I have a lot of good memories there. But it was one of those things where it was like, you know what? I think this is a really good next step. And I'm still on really great terms with everyone at MBA. I talk to them all the time. I consult with them. I stay in touch with all the instructors that I used to train. And I still see them around the juvenile hall sometimes. But this really feels like it's the right move for me, because I can just get more access to the kids. And for someone like me who's so passionate about the therapy side and the direct service and teaching mindfulness explicitly to young folks, it just felt right. So I took that opportunity, and it's been It's been about 6 months or so, something like that. And yeah, it's been going great. I'm fitting in very well, getting along with everyone and really doing well with the program up there.
Awesome. It sounds like this is the opportunity that you've wanted to just work more closely with the kids as opposed to, being the executive director at MBA Project. I imagine there's a little more distance than you would have liked and not quite that direct contact in teaching and helping.
Right. That's right. I remember when I took over the executive director role actually somewhat reluctantly because I just knew that wasn't my ambition, but I knew that there was also nobody else that was fit for the job. So me and the board of the MBA kind of worked together and they gave me the auxiliary training that I needed to be an executive director. And I ended up doing that and doing a pretty good job. At least I like to think. And I was able to still work with youth when I was the executive director, but it was really like a job on top of a full-time job already. And that, that leads to burnout. And I just wanted to go back to my passion of what it had been before I had taken over that job at MBA, which was, working with youth directly, being on the front lines, really. That's really where I see myself doing the most good.
That's great. Congratulations to you on that. And I'm kind of curious if you've run into any challenges. It's a prison system. It's a government-run organization. Any questions coming up about, hey, is this religion? What are you doing here? That kind of stuff?
Surprisingly, no, actually. I'm just going to give my plug to my juvenile hall real quick. So it's the Alameda County Juvenile Hall, which for those of you who don't know, Alameda County is where Oakland is. So most of the kids in the juvenile hall, at least about half or a little bit more, are from Oakland, California. The juvenile hall, maybe it's because we're in a progressive area. I don't know, but they love it. They don't have a problem with it. They formally contract the MBA project to teach meditation. But not only that, they formally contract a program called Niroga, which teaches yoga every day. And I don't just mean the poses, like they're going into yogic philosophy as well. I sat in on a few of their classes, which were really fun. There's just something about the juvenile hall where they're okay with it. I mean, I think from their perspective, they're kind of like in a situation where it's like, we want to help these kids. And if this is something that can work, let's try this out, and they've been trying it out for many years and been having those contracts with those organizations for many years and have been good results have been showing. So there doesn't seem to be a big problem there in terms of them being worried about, are we teaching religion? Now, I can't really speak for the MBA project anymore, but when I was there, of course we weren't going in there and just talking about Buddhism, but
yeah, you did a great job of keeping that separation, that we're not trying to convert people. That's not what this is about.
Right. However, though, youth would bring it up. And whenever a youth would bring it up, of course, we would go there and we'd make it clear. And it's the same thing now when I'm teaching. I teach my mindfulness group on the maximum security unit. And that's my own program that, we'll talk about in a moment. But the religion does come up in there, but it only comes up, I engage that when it only comes up from their side when they bring it up because, we got to all remember that these kids are incarcerated, and especially the ones that I'm dealing with are doing a serious amount of time for serious crimes. So they get very religious because it helps them cope with what their experiences and what they're dealing with. So they ask those questions sometimes, and I absolutely engage them on that, but also at the same time make it clear that this isn't a conversion or anything like that. And I think the juvenile hall really appreciates and respects that. And I think that's one of the main reasons that they just haven't had much of an issue with it so far.
Right. And they have so much experience with you already, and you're honoring that there is this history, but it's not something that we need to bring into as we do this practice for people and helping them and meeting them where they are.
That's absolutely right.
So, Sam, we also added a video to the episode page for this episode of you talking at the MIEN conference in 2013. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that was great. It was fun. I was invited to speak at the MEAN conference, Mindfulness in Education Network conference in 2013. And they flew me out to Massachusetts, and basically just had me come and speak about my basic philosophy and said, hey, there's going to be three kind of main speakers today. You're one of them. Can you get up there and talk about what you do with the youth? And I pretty much just gave an overview of my kind of opinions and views of relational mindfulness, talked about what it means to be authentic as a facilitator, as a therapist, how to really build authentic human being connections with the young people I work with, and how to not try and like control them and really, really have an alternative stance on behavioral change and not try to tell them, not judge them or tell them what they're doing is wrong or what they did was wrong, but more go with the flow and meet them. And I kind of contextualized each of those points philosophically within a mindfulness-based paradigm, and just threw in a couple of experiences of working with youth, and the crowd really loved me. And I mean, I hate to say it that way. They gave me a lot of good feedback, and it was just a wonderful experience. I mean, the guy who runs the show there, Richard Brady, he was great. And he just really supported the work that we were doing. And, a lot of gratitude expressed on both sides for that. So it was really fun.
That's great. Wonderful for you to have that opportunity to talk about and share your work. So tell us a little bit about what's been happening with this new book, what it's about.
Sure. So the new book was actually supposed to be my first book. The other book that we did a podcast on that ended up being my first book, I thought was going to be my second book. So the story behind that is I wrote the proposal for this book long, long ago, and I shopped it around to different publishers, and all the publishers just said no. For one reason or another, like, oh, you haven't done your research study yet. At the time, the study was like being undergone but hadn't been published yet or whatever. And I can't remember some of the other reasons. But for one reason or another, it didn't work out. So I put it on hold. I started writing the other book, and then that other book got published. And I said to myself, let's keep going with this momentum. So I reached out to the same publisher, and they were happy to publish the second book. And it's called Mindfulness-Based Substance Abuse Treatment for Adolescents, a 12-session curriculum. And basically what it is a 12-session step-by-step manual about how to incorporate mindfulness into substance abuse treatment. And my vision of that is, for teachers, for therapists, for school counselors, for substance abuse counselors, for many different professionals who actually teach substance abuse or run substance abuse groups. If they wanted to pick up the book, they could look at and say, this program looks great. I want to implement it all 12 sessions step by step. Then they would have a resource to do that. Or if they were like, this program looks great, but I already have my own thing going on, but I want to use a couple of activities from here, then they can look at the book and do that as well. So that's kind of my vision, is that it's a resource for the real world. Would I be absolutely ecstatic if people started incorporating this program exactly as it is into their inpatient facilities and substance abuse groups with youth? Of course I would. I think that would be wonderful. But I also know that there's a real world out there, and people are going to do what they can do. And for some people, it means just incorporating a portion of the curriculum, but not the whole thing, based on what their needs are, based on what the setting is that they're working in. So me and a colleague created this curriculum over probably about 5 years. I mean, we did a lot of meticulous process research first, meaning before we did the research on how this curriculum affected the youth we were working with, the process research was, it got as meticulous as, in this activity, should we be sitting in a circle? Should we be sitting more stadium style? Should we be in a semicircle? Should this meditation go at the beginning of the class or the end of the class, the middle of the class? Should this specific meditation, something like mindfulness of the breath, should we start with that? Where in the lineup should we practice the body scan? So we did all of this very meticulous process research, and over about 5 years, over about 2 or 3 years of doing process research, where we really honed down what the curriculum was going to be. We had a wonderful laboratory, in a sense. Me and my partner were working at a juvenile detention camp we would facilitate 2 groups a week. And, we would actually, for many years, would pilot different activities in the different groups and just experiment, anecdotally about how that would go. Then after a while, then when we started to really hone it down, we started to do more of the outcome research, and we would interview the kids about what the effect of the program was on their life. We would take pre and post measures, behavioral measures, all those things. And we really found that the program impacted them very positively. And that's really how this curriculum came to be. So I'm happy to go through some of the chapters, if that makes sense at this point.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about 2 things. First is if there is going to be, or maybe there already is, published results on the curriculum itself. And then I'm curious also about the idea of 12 steps, of 12 parts to a means to deal with addiction and recovery. That's a special number. I'm sure that was done with great care and intentionality. And I'm wondering if there is any corollaries between that and other, perhaps better known at this point in time, 12-step programs, or if it's really different, it just happens to be that number.
Sure. Let me answer the first one. Yes, there is published research, and I can definitely get you the links to that. We have a number of pilot studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals, basically showing that, from pre to post tests, one of the main things that we found was that impulsivity had decreased, which makes sense if you think about it conceptually when we're teaching mindfulness. The hope is that impulsivity will decrease. Doesn't always happen in the research, but we found that, which was good. And the other thing that we found that was interesting was that cautionary attitudes towards drugs increased. So, these kids in this particular study were incarcerated at the time. So I won't say that these kids in the institutions don't get drugs, but I'll say it's definitely not enough to be able to use it as a measurable result in a research study. We just measured their attitudes towards drugs. I gave them peer-reviewed surveys that basically said stuff like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how dangerous do you think it is to drink 6 beers in a night, stuff like that, with different drugs and stuff like that. So that increased from pre to post test, which was interesting. We also did another study where we meticulously interviewed youth about the actual meditation aspect, because the curriculum is multifaceted. There's a mindfulness component where we're teaching explicit mindfulness meditation. There's a discussion component. There's experiential components. So it's not like the youth are just meditating all, for the whole session. That doesn't really work out for adolescents. It needs to be something that weaves in philosophically, but also just makes sense to them in their lives. So we interviewed them about that. And one of the things we wanted to see was was there a specific type of meditation that they gravitated to more first, because we wanted to get that hook. And so that was one study we did, and we found some very interesting results there. And then that was actually, we went into that as more of like a process study to figure out what the meditation lineup was going to be. But it ended up being kind of a process and an outcome study, because we got all this wonderful data on kids saying, these kids are in a detention camp and they get home passes if they're good. I remember one kid saying, yeah, when I was on my home pass, I saw my friend and he had some weed, and he was in a wheelchair because he had just been shot. He asked me if I was going to smoke some weed with him. And I did one of the techniques to calm myself down and think in the moment and think about, future consequences. And I decided not to. And that's some really amazing data when you're thinking about a young person who sees a friend who has just been shot and who's in a wheelchair for the first time, and all the emotion that comes up, all the trauma that gets triggered. Of course, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they're going to smoke the weed with them and say, forget it, I'm not going back to camp, I'm going to run away. So we got a lot of really great data like that. And so that was a great study. And then there's a couple others in there as well. But the other main one, I'll say, under review right now, and it should be coming out very soon or in the next few months. That was a randomized clinical trial where we were able to have a control group and actually do behavioral measures, not necessarily, well, we did some self-report measures where, the kids were filling out surveys before and after, which is, very standard. But one of the limitations to self-report measures is that they're self-report. So we wanted to get some other data as well. So we checked in with the staff at the institution, and they let us pull their points data. This was like a points-based system every day, where if the youth was good, they would get their full points. If they messed up, if they got in a fight or mouthed off to a teacher or a staff, the points got taken away. And of course, those points were attached to, certain benefits of going home and, privileges at the institution. So we were able to pull those points for the duration of the study. And these are points that the staff award the youth. It's pretty objective. I mean, nothing is completely objective because the staff are human beings as well. But that's what the randomization kind of controls for. We randomized the young people into the control group versus the treatment group, the ones who got formal mindfulness meditation training and got the formal program. And we found that the behavioral points for the treatment group were significantly and consistently higher than for the other group. So it's just really interesting data. It supports what we really already know in a sense. I mean, we do this research as practitioners, as somebody like myself who, I definitely consider myself a researcher, but if I'm thinking about my identity, I'm certainly a practitioner and a healer first. We already know that this stuff works. That's why it's been around for thousands of years. But we do it for the research world to kind of play the game and say, hey, look, the data is also supporting this as well. So it's really great to see that.
Yeah, to be able to have this external validation so that it's not just our own biases, our own inclinations as practitioners, because we do love the practice and we do see value in it. But to get that external validation for those who aren't practitioners and don't see the value, to demonstrate, here it is.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I hope as this book comes out, I'm planning, I have a lot of colleagues who are very higher up in the research world than myself. And I hope that this curriculum gets researched even more and dissected, and for better or for worse, it's all about getting it out there and making it better. That's the intention. So
excellent. So tell us about the chapters. What's that look like?
Well, let me just answer your other question real quick about the 12. I gotta be honest with you. I didn't even think about that. What we did actually was we piloted an 8-session curriculum when we were doing all this process research. 8 sessions versus 10 sessions versus 12 sessions. We found that 8 sessions was really, really fast. 10 sessions was good too, but we ended up making it 12 sessions just because like the first session is so much of an introduction, and we're really setting the foundation for the whole curriculum. And we need a whole, session to do that. And the last session is really like a closing ceremony where we're acknowledging what the youth have done. And we need a whole session for that as well. So although there is content and very important activities in the first session and in the last session, most of the meat of the content is in between those. So that's why it ended up being 12. In terms of our philosophy, it is very different from the 12-step approach. We really are more on the harm reduction side rather than the abstinence side. And for those of you who don't know, that basically means, a lot of 12-step programs and AA programs at least traditionally say if you're in recovery and you take a sip of alcohol, you relapsed and you got to start over from scratch. Whereas the harm reduction side it's about doing your best to reduce alcohol use, to reduce drug use. And if you went from drinking 5 times a day to, every day to 3 times a week, there's some progress.
It's a huge difference. Yeah.
We acknowledge that. So this is really on the harm reduction side of the spectrum. And we really, one of the things that makes me be able to consistently do this work with little resistance from the youth is that I literally go into the session and I tell them, hey, I'm not telling you not to do drugs. It's not my role to tell you to not do drugs. You've been through different things in your life. You may have been through some significant trauma. And I know a lot of kids who smoke marijuana because they've had some significant trauma. And what does marijuana do? Oftentimes it activates, not for everybody, but for a good chunk of people, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system and the relaxation response occurs and they feel relaxed, and that counteracts some of those hyperarousal trauma symptoms that some of these kids have. So it works in a sense, so it's not my place to say don't do drugs. This isn't like if you do drugs, this is what's going to happen kind of thing. The philosophy is more like, hey, we want to live consciously. We want to connect with you as human beings first. We want to live consciously. And our hope is that you live with self-awareness and that you actually make the choices that you can make in your life rather than just reacting to your environment. And of course, we present them with the potential downfalls of consistent drug usage, but we do that in much more in an informatory way. It's more like, here's some information. I really hope that you'll take this seriously, but we're not just like, if you do drugs, we're not just like, you're bad if you do drugs or you should never do drugs again. That just doesn't work with adolescents.
And it seems that it's having the approach of, if you stumble, if you're a human being and you falter and everything you've done before is a wash and you got to start all over again, would be very discouraging, as opposed to, we recognize that we're human beings and you're doing your best. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean you don't try real hard. It doesn't mean that you don't set an intentionality, but it makes it attainable. And I think that it sounds like that may help this program.
Yeah, it does. Because, I've worked with adolescents from all different backgrounds in all different places on the spectrum of addiction. And when you're working with folks who maybe just use marijuana recreationally, that's a very different field than if you're working with, straight up addicts who are drinking alcohol every day. And some people think, teens can't be addicts, but they definitely can. I've worked with some young folks who were just deep into some very hard drugs, and it's very sad. And for those folks, we have to approach them differently than just kind of a, semi-consistently recreational, marijuana user. And so this program really gives space for that. We're trying to meet the clients, we're trying to meet the students and the adolescents where they're at, and we're trying to just cater the program specifically to their needs. And you're absolutely right. It's let's connect as a human being. Let's value the human beingness, with everything, the mistakes, the stumbles, like you said, and let's get on that level and go from there. And when that relationship builds, as I talked about in my other book extensively on the other podcast, when we're able to build that authentic relationship, whatever it is we have to say is much more received and listened to from the adolescents that we work with, because there's actually a relationship there. And this curriculum stands on the shoulders of that philosophy 100%. And I talk about that in the book as well.
Excellent. So tell us what's in there.
Sure. So we have a couple of introductory chapters, but that's kind of the stuff that you normally see in a curriculum book: an introduction, how it was made. We review the research. There's kind of a how-to chapter, how to use this curriculum, which I recommend that everybody reads who reads the book. And then there's the 12 sessions. And like I said, we have a number of different topics that bring in mindfulness in different ways. The first session is an introduction to the program. So we're really laying the foundation for the whole curriculum. We're setting up agreements, group agreements. Well, I've always liked to call them agreements rather than rules. And I talk about this with the young people. I say, what's the difference between a rule and an agreement? And they always say, well, if you break rules, you get punished. And I say, that's absolutely right. And with an agreement, if you step out of the bounds of an agreement, it's more like a conversation. Like, hey, I thought we agreed to this. Remember when we agreed to this in the first session, And that is such a different feel in the therapeutic atmosphere than the rules side, because I literally do that. And sometimes with some kids, I have to do it often, but it's still a very different feel when I say, hey, we agreed to this. Remember agreeing to that with me? And they say, oh yeah, you're right. Rather than saying, hey, you just broke the rules. Like, I'm kicking you out of class or whatever punishment there is. So that first session is all about introduction to the group agreements and an introduction to what mindfulness is. And basically the way the curriculum works is in every session we have experiential activities, meditations and other visualizations, contemplations, other experiential activities. We have didactic information. We are providing them with some information that they don't have. And we have process-based activities as well which where we're like processing experience or maybe doing, all talking in a circle about a discussion topic or something like that. And each session has a mix of those. And the curriculum overall basically has, if you look at it from a macro perspective, the main activity in each curriculum, whether that be a didactic activity or a process or experiential based activity, as you go through the curriculum, we mix that up as well too. So that, for example, in session 2, where we're going right in there about the health effects of drugs, and which is primarily didactic, but also has some experiential where we're saying, hey, here's all the drugs that are out there, or help us think about all the drugs that are out there. Here's all the drug categories that are out there, stimulants, depressants, stuff like that. These are the main effects that they have on your body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have some very innovative activities to go along with that. And of course, some formal, we connect the formal mindfulness training to being aware of different drugs and aware of what's going in your body and all of those sorts of things. Some of the curriculum content is nothing new in substance abuse treatment. Like, for example, educating folks about stimulants and depressants. That's not new in the field of substance abuse, but what's innovative in this curriculum is the way in which we approach it. We have a bunch of different games and formal, like, kind of competition activities where we have 2 teams trying to figure out which drug goes into which category and stuff like that. So that's what's more innovative about the curriculum. As we go into session 3, the title for that session is Reacting versus Responding. And so we're going from introduction to the program in session 1, going straight into some substance abuse education content in session 2, because we found that a lot of the young people we work with really like and want that information. But they don't want it in some like scared straight kind of way. It's not there to scare them. It's there because they request it because they actually want to know what they're putting in their body, and most kids don't know. And then in session 3, in reacting versus responding, we go back to some deeper mindfulness content and talk about, what the difference between a reaction and a response is. And we have a bunch of different activities, including role plays and skits that we do, where we actually have the youth practice responding instead of reacting, using mindfulness as a technique and connecting that, of course, to substance abuse behaviors, but not only substance abuse behaviors, anger management, blowing up, anything that has the potential for reactivity. Then in session 4, the title of that session is Mindfulness of Delusion. And we go back into some more substance abuse content. And really the core of this session is, why do we do drugs? Like, it's not doing drugs are bad, but do you know why you do drugs? And we have the word delusion in the title because most of the content of the session is around becoming mindful of the real reasons you do drugs and becoming aware of the delusions that most folks have, at least most teens that I work with have, about their substance use. So to make that a little bit more concrete, there's an activity in there where we ask the kids to think of all the pros and the cons of drug use. And we have the pros in there for a reason. And the reason is people wouldn't do drugs if there weren't advantages.
Right. There has to be a payback. There's something that's making it happen.
That's just the reality. I mean, some substance abuse facilitators really don't like talking about that stuff because they think it will encourage more substance use, but that's just not reality. I mean, if talking about, if doing something like that encourages more substance abuse, then you're not doing anything on top of what's already going on inside a young person's mind that can encourage them to do more substance use. This grounds it in reality. It makes the youth much more receptive to it. So anyways, long story short, we get them thinking about why it is they do drugs. What are their personal pros and cons? You get a list of you get people generating these lists of, the pro is that it helps me forget about trauma. When I drink, I don't think about my friend that got killed. Or when I drink, or when I do drugs or do prescription pills, I don't think about the fact that my dad, who makes a lot of money, is never in my life. You get people really being honest about things like that. Because at the beginning, when I first do an activity like that and ask people why they do drugs, it's all positive stuff like, I smoke weed because it's fun, like it's great, I like to party, but then when you really get down a layer beneath that and get the kids to really think about why it is they're doing drugs. Yes, partying and having fun is a piece of it. For some people, the recreation side is real, but there's another side of it as well where young people are using it to cover up symptoms, to deal with the pressures of whatever they're dealing with in life. And so we want to kind of unpack that delusion about, hey, if you're doing drugs, for most kids, like, you're not just doing drugs just to have fun and party. That's the delusion side. That's the side where it's like you're lying to yourself a little bit, Again, I'm not the one to say don't do drugs. I'm saying if you're going to do drugs and you pick up that drink or that alcohol or that weed or whatever it is, every time you're trying to forget, know that you're doing that. That sounds kind of like an oxymoron because they're trying to forget, but at the same time, it gets them thinking about why they're doing what they're doing. And so, of course, we have a bunch of mindfulness activities in this and a bunch of other activities in this session as well. But that's the core. It's like, hey, let's start to unravel this delusion and come more into clear view about what it is we're doing. And, that session really, really, really resonates with a lot of kids. Then we go into session 5, which is emotional awareness, where we're really going deep into mindfulness of emotion, kind of like, I was going to say the second foundation of mindfulness, but I don't know if you could tell I'm a little sick. So I can't even remember right now. There's mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling. It would be more like the third foundation of mindfulness, where we're actually, I take that back. It's a little bit of a mix. We talk about, pleasant feelings versus unpleasant feelings, stuff like that. But we also talk about emotions themselves as they arise. We talk about social conditions and gender norms about emotions. And we do a lot of content in this session where we pay homage to some curricula that's been out there for a while. We just took it and wrapped it in a little bit different of a package, but we use like the man box and the woman box from the Oakland Men's Project, who published some stuff, a curriculum many, many years ago. And we weave that in and really solidify it into the mindfulness philosophy. And the youth really, and that session tends to be very deep if you do it skillfully. And the kids always, when we interviewed them, reflected on that session and say, hey, that session when we were talking about our emotions and some of the experiences we've been through, that really resonated with us. That's something that I'll remember from this curriculum. And that's where we also, because we're getting kind of deep and talking about pain and suffering, that's also where we first introduce compassion-based meditation practices as well. In session 6, we're going from, in session 5, kind of a deep emotional session. So in session 6, we kind of bring it back to a more didactic, less emotionally exhaustive session, because we found that over time, the kids just couldn't do that back to back, and they would often back in the next session, very high energy, humorous, joking around a lot. And we saw that to be a reality with many groups because it was kind of like a built-in defense against, okay, I just went through this deep thing. Let's not be deep today. This is a way for us to take care of ourselves so we're not there too much, which is actually very emotionally intelligent in a sense. And so in session 6, we really go into the brain on drugs. And that's not new content either. That's just, how do different drugs affect the brain? And we talk about it in the curriculum, in the book. It's very general because we know that different groups are going to talk about different drugs. So we made it general on purpose to say, generally, this is how drugs affect the brain. We talk about some differences in there, but we leave it open so that, and I say this very explicitly in the book, if you work in a group and 90% of them are using meth, then cater that brain on drugs to a meth presentation. And on the website that I'll talk about in a little bit, we're going to have resources for all of that stuff as well. But the curriculum is already evidence-based by some of that research I was talking to you about. But making it even more evidence-based means to cater it specifically to the preferences and values and needs of the clients you're working with. That's actually one of the 3 points to make of evidence-based treatment as defined by the Institute of Medicine and the American Psychological Association. So that's what that one is. This is a session also where a youth leadership theme undertone starts. In sessions 1 through 5, probably starting actually in sessions 3 through 5, I start telling the youth, hey, we've been meditating for a while. The meditation time increases each session. And I said in sessions 3 through 5, I said, hey, you guys can teach this too. You can do this too. I want to volunteer. Who's going to volunteer to start teaching these meditations? So in session 6, we start with the youth volunteering to teach the opening centering meditation, which is only, 1 or 2 or 3 minutes long. So it's nothing too long. And they actually start facilitating and putting themselves in a leadership role too. And so in sessions 6 through 12, there's opportunities for youth to at least facilitate the centering meditation and really gain some skills, some leadership skills, some skills of being a teacher and having everybody look at them while they facilitate an activity, of learning mindfulness a little bit deeper because they have to learn what to say, or learning a specific meditation a little bit deeper because they have to think about what they're going to say to facilitate that meditation to the rest of the group. So that's where that undertone starts in session 6, which is, we've seen some great results with that. Session 7 is mindfulness of cravings. I won't go too much into that, but that is where we just tackle the core of drug use, which is dealing with craving. Session 8 is mindfulness of triggers. So we're building on the cravings theme and saying, okay, you're craving and something off that. We wanted to start with craving because it was really at the core, at least in the lineup, at this point in the lineup of the curriculum sessions. And then afterwards, we come in with the triggers and say, there's triggers in your internal environment, those types of cravings that arise, but there's also triggers in your external environment. And sometimes those triggers trigger that craving. Sometimes the craving comes internally and manifests in different triggers. And we want to be aware of all of those. And the reason for that is because with more awareness of those triggers, there's a potential for more autonomy and more choicefulness and more of an ability to respond to those triggers. Think about how you're going to respond to them before you actually do versus reacting to them, blindly reacting and using drugs or blowing up, getting in a fight with your mom or getting in a fight with somebody at school and then being mad and ditching school and using drugs or something like that. The last 3 sessions, besides the closing ceremony, sessions 9, 10, and 11, we wanted to pay homage to the other systems that youth are dealing with. Family system, the peer system, the external environment. There's no secret out there that right now, at least in the research, what's showing the most efficacious treatment for young people, for teens dealing with substance abuse and juvenile justice and stuff like that, are more comprehensive family-based interventions where you get the family involved, do family counseling and stuff like that. So there's some really great interventions out there that have shown some good results, and they're much more comprehensive than just individual or group psychotherapy. So we wanted to pay homage to that because the reason we wanted to create this curriculum was specifically for people who ran substance abuse groups, because most people that do substance abuse treatment facilitation with adolescents, or in general, but with adolescents, are doing it in groups. That's the most economical way for people to get treatment, is to do it in groups. And doing a full-fledged, comprehensive family-based counseling intervention just takes a lot of resources. So many nonprofits and government entities and different programs are running groups, but we didn't want to just say, hey, the family doesn't matter. Of course the family matters. The family system is extremely important in this. So in session 9, which is titled The Family System in Drugs, we go into a lot of your relationships with your family and how drugs play a role in that. We really start to presence compassion heavily in this session. One of the main activities in this session, it's called a My Children contemplation. So basically what I do is I have the youth get in kind of a meditative posture, and I have them put themselves 15 or so years in the future in their mind and just envision what it would be like to have kids, even if they don't want to have kids. And some of the young people in these groups may even have a kid or two that's like 1 or 2 years old. And I get them to think about, contemplate, and visualize this young, beautiful child, innocent, as a young baby, growing up, becoming a teen, and basically giving them hell. And coming in from, curfew late and doing drugs and doing some of the behaviors that they're doing right now. And so I encourage them to put themselves in the perspectives of their parents and what that feels like every day, what types of emotions are arising in the moment when your kid is supposed to be home and they're not home right now. Are you scared? Do you feel fear? Do you feel anger? What do you feel? So I go through this kind of whole contemplation with them, ring the bell to signify the end of the meditation. And these, always at least half of the class just opens their eyes like, holy crap. I had one kid was like, I have a daughter. He had a daughter at the time, a 1-year-old. He's just like, I was so scared thinking about that stuff. And it just makes me think about the things I put my parents through. And another kid says, man, I just couldn't stop thinking about when I would visualize my kid, this is somebody who didn't have a kid, but was just kind of envisioning what it was like. Another participant saying, when I was thinking about my kid, kind of yelling back and talking back to me because they got caught doing drugs or they got caught, doing something they weren't supposed to do. I just couldn't help but think about when I was doing that with my parents like 2 months ago, So it puts them in a position to take another perspective, a perspective beyond their own. And that's what a lot of family therapy does as well. So that's just one of the activities in that curriculum. Like I said, we also really start to presence the compassion-based meditations there as well. And I've seen kids, really hard kids in really tough situations break down and cry and just become very emotional about it because it's sometimes the first time they're really taking the perspective of somebody else in their life, let alone, their parents or their mother or their grandfather, whoever it is that takes care of them. In session 10, we go from mindfulness in the family system or the family system and drugs in session 9 to session 10, which is mindfulness of the peer system. So again, another really, really important system that teens are dealing with when we're talking about drugs. This is the most influential system on young people. It's, hey, my friends are doing drugs. I'm going to do drugs as well. Let's do this. Even if you're a leader and you're not a follower in the group, you're still in that context in that social peer context, and you're still influenced from it. So we really wanted to tackle that as well and say, hey, let's think about this. What is the difference between a true friend, somebody who has your best interest in mind, versus more of an accomplice, somebody who has their best interest in mind? When you're on probation and you're going to get P-tested next week, when your friend comes up and starts smoking a bunch of weed in front of you and encouraging you to smoke weed with them, are they acting as a friend in that moment or as an accomplice? Are they really acting with your best interest? So one thing we don't do is say, drop all your friends, and get new friends, because that just doesn't work with teens. Just like telling them to not do drugs doesn't work. But what we do say is, if you say, know who your true friends are. And for folks that really don't care about you, maybe you can drop them if you really think about it and say, yeah, this guy really, because a lot of these kids hang out with people who are not necessarily their friends, and really don't care about them. And that just happens from being in the neighborhood. But even with the ones who are true friends, sometimes they can be true friends and really love you, but sometimes act as accomplices just because that's what people in general do.
They're human beings.
Right. Human beings oftentimes think about their own best interests, and it takes training and conditioning, reconditioning to go from thinking about yourself to thinking about somebody else, at least as a default. So we teach them how to talk with their friends, and we teach them to authentically communicate, to say, hey, like, nah, I'm not gonna hit the weed today. And guess what? I'm still your friend and I still love you. And please support me in that. Please come around right now. I'm on probation, or my parents are down my back. The school's down my, going down my throat right now with this stuff. So please just support me. It doesn't mean we're not cool. We give them those kind of basic but authentic communicating skills where they can really communicate from the heart. And we also encourage them to, have those conversations with those folks in their lives who maybe aren't friends, but really are authentically accomplices, and to judge whether maybe they can be a real friend and what that would take. And we have a whole bunch of compassion practices around that as well. But again, the peer system is just so relevant in these young people's lives when it comes to anything, but, drugs as well, that we wanted to tackle that. The final kind of content-based session 11, is titled Mindfulness of the External Environment. And there was no way we were going to do this curriculum without talking about the context that these young people are in. And as some of the listeners may know from reading my other book, or, you might know, I generally work with incarcerated youth, which come from very tough neighborhoods and tough contexts. But I've worked with every type of young person, different genders, different ethnicities from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And no matter what the socioeconomic background is, no matter what the ethnicity or the gender or whatever, there's always a context in which drug use occurs. If you're from a really hard neighborhood and you see heroin addicts every day walking down the street, that's part of your context, and that influences your decision making, and it influences the types of choices that you even get to make. And on the other side of the spectrum, if you're from a very wealthy neighborhood in a very wealthy household, and your father has an extensive liquor cabinet that you know where the key to is, that affects your context as well. And that affects what's going on. It gives you access to these types of drugs. So the external environment is very important. And we talk about the different systems in these young people's lives that influences not only the types of decisions they have to make, but their decision-making process. And we interweave mindfulness with that. And it's really, we did a lot of work on this session because we wanted to be applicable to somebody from a really tough, impoverished neighborhood, but also somebody who's not from that type of neighborhood, who's from a wealthy neighborhood, and everywhere in between. And that's what, this curriculum is about. It's a curriculum for young people, and we wanted it to be applicable to everyone, and that's our hope. That's our intention, at least. So that's what that session is about, where we're really kind of going deep into what are the different systems in your life? What constitutes that external environment? Is it walking down the street and seeing drug dealers every day? Is it coming home to a cabinet filled with, Oxycontin and other prescription opiates that you could easily abuse? What is it? Whatever it is, that's what we need to become aware of, because we interweave all of that with past sessions, like, for example, becoming aware of your triggers. What triggers are in your environment? That's what we're trying to tackle with that. And then finally, the session 12, the final session, is the closing ceremony. That's what it's titled. And that's where we're really wrapping things up. One of the biggest things about that session was we initially started doing these focus groups after the 12th session to collect research, both process and outcome research, where we would do these focus groups, interview the youth, and say, what was this program like? What was good about it? What was bad about it? What could be improved? How did you feel about the meditation? We got a lot of very, very good data for our research studies. But one thing we also noticed was that when we did this in a group, there was actually a therapeutic effect of doing this focus group. Just the act of reflecting on the whole program solidified the experiences with the youth more. So after about 4 or 5 cohorts of doing, when we were still, figuring out, tweaking the curriculum, we started adding it to the final session. And whether you're collecting formal data or whether you're just doing it as a more reflection activity, it's in that final session so people can reflect and solidify those experiences. And we have more mindfulness and compassion-based techniques as well, and some, closing ceremony, kind of traditional things, certificate ceremony, going around the circle and saying last words. I have this kind of existential-based activity that I picked up from one of my mentors, where you go around the circle and you say anything to anyone in the group or to the group as a whole that you're feeling called to say. And you kind of imagine yourself never seeing these people again. What would you want to say to these folks if you never saw them again? Positive, of course, not negative stuff. And it gets really deep. It gets really deep.
Sam, I'm kind of curious how long each session is, and if the participants have some homework that they need to do in between the sessions.
Great question. I had it in my mind to cover that and forgot about it. So thank you for bringing that up. So the sessions are designed to be an hour and a half, 90 minutes. However, I'm very explicit in this book. Not everybody has an hour and a half. Some people just have an hour. If you're in a school setting, you might have 45 minutes. So they're designed to be an hour and a half each session. But if you need to break it down so that you're doing one session over 2 groups that are 45 minutes each, because that's what you have in your school, you can do that. The curriculum allots for that. The homework is not mandated, but it is highly encouraged. So we tried to mandate homework early on in our process research, and we just found out, some kids would do it, some kids wouldn't. It just didn't really work. So we encourage them to do certain things in between sessions, formally meditate, of course, all those types of things. And we found that it wasn't having a mandate to do homework. It was just whether we really encourage them to do it and say, hey, like, can you meditate 3 or 4 times for me this week? I really want you to see if it actually works. And if you just do this once, that's just not really a good amount of time to check it out. So try it out 3 or 4 times, and then let's check in next week. And when you kind of come at the youth that way, where in my voice, I'm kind of projecting this stuff works. From my experience, it works. Give it a solid, give it a solid try. If you don't like it after that, okay, nobody's going to force you to meditate. But when you do that, then I found more success in them actually trying it out. And, 95% of the time they come back and say, hey, it did work, or I felt more calm or more relaxed, or I tried this technique and I found some success in it. So short answer is not mandated, but highly encouraged. And we have a couple of different activities that or a couple of different techniques throughout the curriculum where we're explicit in saying, encourage the youth to try this 1 or 2 times between now and next session, whether, depending on whether next session is a week from now or a couple of days, if you're doing the curriculum over, 1 session over a couple of class periods or something like that.
And tell us a little bit about the target audience. What are the unique needs they have as opposed to those of us who are simply practicing mindfulness on our own or maybe with a group?
Right, absolutely. So the audience is really therapists, school counselors, teachers, substance abuse counselors, anybody who's running a formal group with adolescents, a formal substance abuse group. But even if you're not doing substance abuse, the activities from this curriculum can be used with different content as well. You could switch out some of the substance abuse content for anger management, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the uniqueness of the situation is we're asking facilitators to teach mindfulness. And that there's a uniqueness in that because it's not just practicing. And to be able to teach mindfulness, one has to be a practitioner first. At least that's my very strong opinion. And I'm very explicit about that in the book. And so they need to get comfortable in that role of being a facilitator. And what I do in the book is I have what we call talking points and also sample scripts. So when you're setting up a particular meditation or teaching a particular meditation or setting up a particular discussion topic or activity, I have bullet points of what is generally said, what we generally said to set those up. And then I literally have an example script of what we said in that moment. And I'm very explicit in the book, and I say, do not read the sample script. I mean, read it when you read the book, but don't read it to the group because that would be inauthentic, and the group would just be, what is going on right now? Are they reading us a poem or something? But it's just a resource for the facilitator to be able to read through and kind of ingrain it in their mind so that when they present the topic or facilitate the meditation, they have a sense of what they should be saying or close to it, and they'll present it in their authentic way. So that's what's unique about it for them, is that they're in this facilitator role, and to teach mindfulness and to teach these other activities as well, they need to have some sort of a command over the material and over the practice, really, because if they don't, they will only get so far. And not that it would be the worst thing in the world if somebody never taught mindfulness before or didn't have much of a practice and picked up this book and, took the kids through some breathing techniques, that wouldn't be evil or anything, but they just wouldn't be able to bring the curriculum to life as much as they could if they had that experience.
Yeah, one of the things that you've shared in all of our conversations, Sam, is the criticality of that authentic presentation in making that connection, that if you don't have that, it's really going to hinder progress in allowing others to learn and practice and get something out of this.
Right.
So, Sam, is there anything else you wanted to share about the book itself before we shift a little bit into another area of a training center?
I think the last thing I'll share about the book that I'd like the listeners to know is the intention is to put something out there to help young people who are suffering and dealing with substance abuse treatment. But this is just, to me, I'm still a younger man at the start of my career, and to me, this is a starting point. And I want to invite people in the community to get in the conversation, to look at this book and use what you will from it. And the things you don't necessarily like, throw that away. If you want to do the full curriculum, that would honor me and my co-author. And I think that would be wonderful in doing it step by step meticulously. But also just think of this as a conversation starter. I hope to, years from now, write revisions on this book, because if something needs to change, then we want to change it, because the intention is to reduce suffering with these young people that we work with. It's not to put out a Bible and say, this is the way to do it and there's no other way. That's not how the world works in reality in this type of profession. So that's the last thing I wanted to say, just that you use this as a starting point, and I welcome connection. I welcome conversation and dialogue.
Great. Thank you. So as part of this, as you mentioned before we started the interview today, there is a complementary aspect to this as well that you've been working on, which is a training center. And I want you to tell us a little bit about that and what you have planned and what's starting.
Sure. The training center is called the Center for Adolescent Studies. And, I've been teaching for a long time now, teaching in the sense of like teaching graduate school courses and facilitating trainings and all these types of things. And I love teaching. I love sharing my passion with other caring adults, professionals, therapists, teachers, whomever, who also want to do this work with young people. Like I said before, my number one passion is to work with youth, but a very close second is to share this work with other adults and professionals. And I had many different ideas and had been teaching through many different venues. And I just said, I want to teach what I want to teach. And so I said, let me just put together an online and in-person training center where I'm really teaching what I'm most passionate about. And it was kind of like if you build it, they will come mentality. And my kind of idea of it is, it doesn't matter to me how fiscally successful this is, because I'm doing what I'm passionate about. And also, I have another full-time job too, so that helps. But, that's where the seed for this came. And I said, what do I want to teach? I want to teach people how to build authentic relationships with young people. I want to teach people how to teach mindfulness to young people. I want to teach people this curriculum. I want to train them in how to do this curriculum and other curriculums, and teach them about trauma-informed care with young people in the classroom or in the therapy session. So that's where this training center came from. And it's launching in July of 2015 fully. The website is up now with some introductory information and some information about how to sign up for different things. But mainly what I'm launching with is a couple of different trainings, with one of them being a certification in this curriculum. So like I was saying before, the intention for this book is just to get it out there. But when you go in the first pages, you'll see, if you want to get trained in this curriculum, if you want to really learn how to bring what's in those pages to fruition in a skillful way to get the best outcome from the youth, then I'm happy to train you in doing that. And that's one of the core aspects of, the Center for Adolescent Studies, is this curriculum certification, where there's going to be an online component to it where you can do some online training first, but then we're also going to sit in an intensive in-person workshop and do that side of things as well, and practice and give each other feedback. That's how we get better at doing these things, about facilitating these types of curriculums. And then I'm also going to have a bunch of other online trainings and free courses as well too. My goal for the Center for Adolescent Studies is to ultimately be a place where any professional who works with adolescents can come and look at the free resources, sign up for trainings if they choose to, but just generally be a part of this community, be on the newsletter, see about different events that are coming up that has to do with serving young people and working with adolescents. And I kept it broad, Center for Adolescent Studies, because I wanted it to be beyond mindfulness. I want it to even be beyond the authentic relationship, which is probably, if anybody who knows me probably would guess, I would have authenticity somewhere in the title, but I just wanted this to be for professionals who interact with adolescents on a daily basis or weekly basis or whatever, who want to gain some skills. Because I just really believe that with better trained adults, there's going to be better outcomes with the youth. I can't teach people how to have a good heart, but if you have a good heart, I can teach you skills to bring that good heart to fruition more with the young people and build those authentic relationships and build some techniques and offer some techniques to those young people. So that's kind of a bird's eye overview of the Center for Adolescent Studies. We're starting with some free courses where people are going to be able to sign up and get, if they're a therapist, get continuing education credit for free, watch an online video of a presentation that I gave. And those courses are going to change every couple of months. There's going to be different topics. The first inaugural topic is, mindfulness as an intervention with adolescents, because I did a presentation and was able to videotape it not too long ago. But I'm also going to have topics on, what is trauma, complex trauma versus PTSD, how to work with students in the classroom who have trauma, just a lot of different topics, teaching meditation, working with LGBT youth, like many different topics. So every couple of months, every 2 or 3 months, I'm going to upload a new course so that members of the Center for Adolescent Studies can get that and get more continuing education and professional development for free. Then I have a fully online self-paced training course called Bars Online, and that's building authentic relationships. And that's really, for me, that's just really the core of like how do we build authentic relationships. If it were up to me, everybody who works with adolescents would be taking that course or a course like that. And that's a fully online self-paced course, mainly video based, but also there'll be some documents to download and stuff like that, and some quizzes and I have a full online learning management system connected to the website. And then, like I said before, the mindfulness-based substance abuse treatment curriculum certification. And like I was saying, there's the training component of it, but there's also going to be a resource section to this website where every meditation that you find in the book, every handout that you find at the back of every chapter. That's one thing I forgot to say when we were talking about the book. Each session, at the end of every session, has handouts that are photocopyable that you can use if you want. You don't have to. But all of those will be downloadable resources on the web for free. All this is for free. And also some PowerPoint slides and different resources for, different interactions with drugs in the brain and stuff like that. And really just a community feel. Anybody who either wants to get deeper training in this curriculum or just wants to have the book and the website as a resource and kind of do their own thing. Those are going to be the three main components that the Center for Adolescent Studies is starting with. And then I have a kind of a business plan of bringing in more trainings as the years go on. And when you go to the website, you can see that on the slider on the front page. If you go to the kind of coming soon section, you'll see what that plan is. Having plans for a certificate in a trauma-informed classroom for teachers working with adolescents who are dealing with trauma, a certificate in adolescent psychotherapy, stuff like that. And there's a couple more up there as well. So that's what this is. And it's again, similar to what I said about the book, this is me reaching out and saying, hey, I love working with adolescents. That's my number one passion. My close second is teaching folks how to work with adolescents, but also really sharing that work with people, because my philosophy as a teacher is that students have wisdom to offer. And so when we get together and I do these trainings, I just love hearing perspectives from the participants in the trainings as well. So this intention, what I'm saying is this intention is let's get together. Let's get together and further this work and really have that dialogue on what constitutes best practices for working with these young people, all with that goal of eradicating and reducing suffering and helping them grow and flourish and thrive and become wonderful, beautiful adults. because we need a little bit more of those in this world right now.
Beautifully said, Sam. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
For now, I think that's good. I really appreciate you letting me come and yap on this podcast with you, and I hope to do it many more times, as I plan to write many more books and keep offering this work to the world, and keep collaborating with folks like you and your listeners.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being here. Our guest today, Sam Himelstein, and you can find out more about Sam and his work on a couple of sites, which will be linked on the episode page for this episode, samhimelstein.com and centerforadolescentstudies.com. Sam, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.